So welcome. Thank you for making time on a Tuesday night this week to come and join our conversation about the Tuggerah Lakes Expert Panel report. So I'm Will Glenmore, I'm the chair of the Tuggerah Lakes Expert Panel, and we were commissioned by Minister Keane back in June of last year with 6 months to deliver a report on Tuggerah Lakes Expert Panel. And we did our utmost to try to get all the scientific information together and where we could get as much information from the community on how, what was the priority for them, what was the background information, what evidence did we have in the community that could support what we were doing. And we spoke to many of you. And so thank you all for that input. We've tried to include that in the report. And then we made our summary and recommendations which we submitted back at the end of the year. So that was December 31st last year. And that was released publicly a couple of months ago now. People have had a little bit of time to digest the report, and we took it upon ourselves as the expert panel members to be very interested in getting feedback on that. One of the things you'd notice in our report is a commentary on trying to build up the knowledge and expectations of how Tuggerah Lakes should be done as a community. And it shouldn't be people in an ivory tower telling the community how things are done. And we wanted that to really roll through this report. So we've produced a report, and this was the first time we could actually go out and speak to everybody. So we very much want to see this as a conversation tonight, trying to provide some background and details of what we were thinking in the report and why we wrote what we did, answer any questions that people may have related to some of those specifics, and then try to work through where this might go and where this might end up. It's important for us to note that the expert panel is finished. We're all independents. We're not part of government. We don't work in government. We have nothing to do. I have nothing to do with government. I'm a university academic professor at University of New South Wales. And so once we're done, we submit our report, the best we can do is advocate for the change in the report. And part of that is creating some transparency around what we were doing and hoping that others will also see some value in what we've done and try to encourage that change to happen. So because the report is very big and we spent a lot of time trying to pull it all together, we thought it was best to divide these seminars into 3 main topics. And that's why tonight is just one of the topics. And it was really just to make sure we had enough time to cover what was in it. And I imagine we'll see a few of you on multiple nights this week. But I'm here as the chair. We've got the rest of the panel. So Stuart Waters is organizing and running the night and keeping everyone on track with time. And he really led the engagement activities throughout the process. Dave Wainwright is here. You can see Dave. Dave really led the investigations on the entrance work and how we should understand what the entrance is doing and what the previous studies had said. Nicole Ramillo is here. Nicole has done and led up most of the work on the catchment. And so how does the catchment process and what's happened with catchment development influence water quality in the lake? And Sean Fawcett is here, another member of the panel, and Sean really worked with us on understanding the community engagement, community perspective, and the role of trying to bring everyone together in this process. I think that's everyone that's here from the panel. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Stuart.
Nicole, I wonder, you might just give us a bit of background on you before.
Oh, sure. Right. So I'm an environmental engineer. I work at BMT.
What's BMT?
So BMT is an environmental engineering consultancy. I think, so private consultancy. It stands for British Maritime Technology or something, where that's sort of the parent organisation. It's UK based. And I think, and so my area of expertise is total water cycle management planning and water sensitive urban design. Yeah, so that's just a bit about me. I like kayaking as well and love my waterways.
Good.
All right, so Thanks. I'll just get back into it. So the key aim, I guess, of the review was to answer the following questions that I have up here. What are the current catchment pressures on water quality? What are the future catchment pressures on water quality? what catchment management measures have been implemented and how effective have they been? And this question really relates to the implementation of recommendations in the Tuggerah Lakes Estuary Management Plan. Lastly, I was looking to see if there are any key knowledge gaps, noting that the review focuses on the present understanding and, as Stuart mentioned, and Will might have mentioned, not new assessment. To investigate these questions, I reviewed a lot of information, including technical and scientific studies for the whole of the catchment, while also specifically looking at 2 catchment case studies, including Berkeley Vale catchment, which is a highly developed catchment draining directly to the lake, and also the Porters Creek wetland catchment, which is a developing catchment draining to sensitive and highly valued Porters Creek wetland prior to discharge to the Wyong River and Tuggerah Lakes. I also reviewed community comments about key issues and concerns in the catchment through the interactive mapping using Social Pinpoint, as well as some online Zoom meetings.
Now, can I just interrupt there? Sorry,
Absolutely.
I'm still seeing your first slide. Have you moved on?
No, now I have.
Okay.
Is that all right?
I just wasn't sure.
Perfect.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks for the reminder. For existing catchment pressures, the key findings indicated that there's been widespread changes to the natural catchment through clearing of vegetation and rural, urban and industrial land uses, which have increased flows and pollutant loads directly impacting on water quality in Tuggerah Lakes. Urban stormwater is a key contributor to the poor water quality in the lakes, as well as existing wetland degradation through altered flow regimes and pollutant loads. Wetlands are really important natural water quality treatment buffers to the lakes, as well as providing other ecosystem services such as habitat, flood mitigation, and groundwater recharge. The impact of stormwater from urban areas fringing the lake has had a significant impact on water quality in those nearshore areas. And this is really because impervious areas are directly connected to the lake via stormwater drains and open channels, which flow with flows and high pollutant loads directly flowing to that nearshore area of the lake. These pollutants get trapped in nearshore areas because of rack buildup, which essentially prevents mixing with lake waters and can cause issues such as eutrophication and the formation of black ooze. Historical clearing of the catchment and stock access has led to accelerated bank erosion, with stream bank erosion estimated to contribute up to double the sediment loads generated by the catchment. And this just demonstrates the importance of managing stream bank erosion for managing sediment loads in the catchment. In terms of the key future catchment pressures to water quality in the lakes, we've got planned population growth, over 40,000 homes in the region by 2036. This presents key future pressures to water quality if not managed appropriately, increasing impervious areas, increasing stormwater pollutant loads to receiving waters, and altering natural hydrology, which can impact on waterway and wetland health. We found planning controls do not ensure that water quality will be maintained or improved. Only drinking water catchments require that these objectives be met, and current planning controls look like they may result in increased loads. Furthermore, in some developments, it looks like treatment recommendations in the development control plan are not being implemented. Poor erosion and sediment control practices. So the large areas of planned development within the catchment present a key future pressure to water quality from poor erosion and sediment control practices during the construction phase. And this has been identified from council and community feedback. Handover of poorly functioning stormwater quality treatment devices to council. So this results in poor water quality outcomes and can also require expensive rectification works of treatment devices. There's limited council funding and resources to maintain new treatment assets. So council's currently stretched as it is to maintain existing assets. So, and let alone the many new ones that will be required for future development and to rectify existing issues also. Single dwelling development exemptions in nearshore areas, essentially not requiring stormwater quality treatment under current planning controls. So this is an issue because, as mentioned previously, stormwater from urban areas fringing the lake has been identified to have significant impact on water quality in those nearshore areas. So development has potential to worsen the fringing water quality and eutrophication and the ooze issues. In terms of catchment management measures and the effectiveness, Council has undertaken a number of catchment management actions to address lake water quality as recommended in that estuary management plan. You've probably all seen information on what's been done on Council's website via their social pinpoint mapping. There's also documented it in a recent implementation summary report. If you haven't seen that, I recommend you get on their website and have a look. Just some examples, they've undertaken extensive stream bank rehabilitation, salt marsh rehabilitation and construction, a bunch of constructed wetlands and gross pollutant traps, and a community education program, which they've done lots of stuff with. So yeah, there's a lot going on. And they've undertaken a lot of actions. They also undertake water quality monitoring and reporting through waterway report cards, which provide a really good overview of how the Tuggerah Lakes and individual catchments are responding. However, it's difficult to directly correlate this to the performance of the individual actions undertaken throughout the catchment. So this is a key gap that's been identified in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of management actions on water quality. There's been limited monitoring or modelling undertaken to quantify the effectiveness of those individual actions in terms of reduction in pollutant loads, apart from gross pollutant traps. Another key gap that was identified is quantifying the sustainable pollutant load targets for the catchment. So that is essentially what pollutant loads generated from the catchment will result in acceptable waterway health for both the lake health for the community and the environment. And lastly, the influence of groundwater on lake water quality, particularly those nearshore areas, was another key gap identified. Overall, a key study finding was that effective catchment management is really crucial for improving water quality in Tuggerah Lakes, and it's worth noting that this conclusion was also well recognised by the community in the feedback that we received. So lastly, I'll just run through some of the key recommendations. Adopting a maintain or improve existing conditions target for all future development. So that means developers are required to ensure that pollutant loads following development are either maintained at the current levels or improved on. Currently, as mentioned, this is only a requirement in drinking water catchments. While we don't know what the sustainable catchment load targets are, this ensures that current water quality is at minimum maintained or improved despite future development pressures. Introducing planning controls for single dwelling developments. So this is particularly targeting development or redevelopment fringing the lake that's directly connected to the lake, such as granny flat extensions or knockdown rebuilds that significantly increase the impervious area and therefore the flows and pollutant loads that are directly flowing to nearshore areas of the lakes, and which can cause issues such as eutrophication and black ooze. Measures such as reducing and disconnecting impervious areas, installing rainwater tanks and rain gardens are just some examples of possible management measures. The stormwater levy should be reinstated to provide funding and ensure asset maintenance. So significant future development means that council will have a large influx of new assets to maintain, and maintenance of assets is so important to ensure that the treatment measures are performing at optimum levels to protect water quality. Improved education and enforcement of best practice erosion and sediment control. So as mentioned, there's large areas of future development in the catchment, and this makes it important to ensure that erosion and sediment control practices prevent sediment from entering the waterways where it can impact on water quality and smother seagrass. Poor erosion and sediment control, as mentioned, can also cause water quality treatment assets to fail. Improving development assessment requirements. So this recommendations about ensuring that stormwater quality treatment assets for new developments is effectively designed and constructed so that assets are handed over in good condition. So it may include requirements such as having construction hold points and sign off from certified professionals such as engineers that specialise in stormwater quality, that proposed management actions have been undertaken as per approved plans, It's also about having requirements for sufficient bonds to be secured from developers to rectify any issues with failing water quality treatment assets once they're handed over. WSID, or water sensitive urban design capacity building in council. This is about ensuring that council staff have the appropriate skills to review and approve stormwater quality treatment assets through the development approval process and provide ongoing maintenance once handed over to council. Implementing a stormwater management plan for Porters Creek catchment to ensure that the wetland is protected from future development. Identifying pollutant hotspots to target treatment in existing urban areas, as well as monitoring the effectiveness of management actions and treatment measures. To help do these last two things, we've recommended that citizen science be used, that is getting the community involved as much as possible in helping to monitor water quality and identify pollution hotspots for treatment measures, as well as monitoring the effectiveness of management actions implemented to address the issues. And the aim of this citizen science is to foster collaboration and promote shared learnings and local knowledge between council and the community. And last but not least is introducing an environmental levy to help fund and implement recommendations. So this has been successfully implemented by other councils, and it's an important funding mechanism rather than only relying on state government grants, just to ensure we get on-ground actions implemented. So that's a bit of a summary of my findings. Shall I hand back to you, Stuart? Shall I stop sharing or?
Stay sharing, that's fine, because we might be able to refer to some of that. So
yep, no worries.
Thanks, Nicole. That's good. That was useful. So there have been a couple of comments,
isn't there? Sorry,
yes,
I haven't seen that.
There's a bit of a chat there, and that's fine. I've just been taking a few notes as you're talking, so I'll come to that in a minute. I just want to first come to a couple of things that we've gathered over the last few weeks, just to honour the input that we've picked up of late. And it's actually reflected just in the chat as well. So some people are concerned about the ash dam related to the power plants and impact on water quality. I don't know to what extent did we, the panel, look into that? What did we learn? Anything we can say or add to that?
Yep, sure. So we did identify that the Monmorah ash dam or Tuggerah Lake is not lined, and therefore that there may be potential for contaminants to leach into the groundwater and the adjacent Tuggerah Lake system. This was included in our conceptual model illustrating the catchment pressures. I actually have it here on hand to show you there. We also noted community concerns were raised about the Monmorah and the Vale Point ash dams. So the Vale Point ash dam is outside of the catchment, but the concerns were that, and that were acknowledged, was that because the ash dam isn't lined, that the contaminants might be leaching into the groundwater system and making their way to the lake system. As part of the lake water quality investigation, another expert panel member, Angus, reviewed studies on the impact of the power stations on lake water quality. He found that, I think, while there were elevated concentrations of the metals in the sediment, they're mostly bound up and they're not having a significant impact on lake water quality or the ecological health. I think he can probably talk to his findings a bit further during that lake water quality session. I also found the latest publicly available audit of the site, which was undertaken in 2017. That was for the Monmorah ash dam. While it wasn't specific, it was an audit of, I think, 10 sites altogether, including that. It did indicate 80% compliance with current requirements, but as mentioned, it didn't specify what was compliant where. There wasn't any high risk non-compliances, and it did mention that most of them have been resolved or were being resolved. A review of the aerial photography around the lake did identify some stands of dead trees around the Monmorah ash dam and next to Lake Monmorah, but these have been these were attributed to mine subsidence. It was a mine subsidence event that caused an influx of salt water or saline water into a freshwater wetland habitat and caused the dieback of vegetation. So it wasn't attributed to the contamination, in this instance, from the ash dam. It was also recognised the work that was being undertaken at that time by the state government inquiry, looking into the adequacy of current regulations, ensuring that best practice management was being undertaken and what the risks associated with inadequate remediation were, including community and environmental health impacts. So essentially, we recommended that that be looked at and the findings would be considered further in the coastal management plan.
Good. All right, thanks. Just as you're talking through all of those things, it's one of the things that really stands out in this whole issue is the complexity and the number of inputs and things that have impacts on the lake system. It's quite extraordinary. So thank you. Another one that certainly came up through the initial consultation period and has come up again this recent weeks is, and I don't know to what extent you looked into this specifically in detail, is the rail maintenance facility at Kangiangi. I don't know, some people are concerned about that, so I don't know if we looked at that at all.
Yeah, look, I do recall that was brought up. I think there were concerns from memory about the impacts on water quality from the construction phase and poor erosion and sediment control, and also ongoing into the operational phase. There were a few other site-specific locations that the community had concern about for erosion sediment control and water quality treatment, like golf courses and the like. Speaking to council, unfortunately, I didn't get any much site-specific information, but speaking to council, it was apparent that that they have limited resources to undertake proactive audits of things in the catchment, such as erosion and sediment control, and the private sites, the compliance, stormwater quality compliance on private sites. The only thing that they have the resources to really proactively audit are the on-site sewage treatment plants, not treatment plants, household sort of sewage systems. So I think they audit something like 400 a year, and they sort of manage that proactively. But yeah, they're really stretched in terms of resources to undertake proactive compliance auditing. Despite that, they did note, and it is important that if the community does see anything affecting water quality in the catchment, that they notify council, because then council are required to follow up and investigate those possible pollution sources. So that is an avenue. But I think it really does suggest that our recommendation for a funding mechanism like the stormwater levy or environmental levy here can be used to help fund some more proactive auditing of the catchments in terms of erosion and sediment control practices and stormwater treatment on private sites and the like.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. That's good. So I'm just looking in chat, and it's nice to see people answering questions amongst yourselves. So we are not the only experts.
I don't have chat up. I can't.
On this panel, so that's good. And also, if any of the other panel members want to jump in at any time on any of this, feel free if there's anything you can add to any of these responses, or indeed if there's a burning question that you picked up.
So Stuart, I might take the opportunity then to say that there's a couple of things here. The big picture for us in this, to where we're trying to seek feedback, is that we have fairly and squarely pointed our finger at the catchment and the issues with water sensitive urban design and how they relate to water quality in the catchment and water quality in the lakes. And so this is a fundamental, I guess, underpinning thesis that we look at here, that the poor quality water, the water quality that is generating most of our concerns in the lake, is coming from the catchment. And the surrounding area. And this is where, if we want to fix it, if we want to get ahead of this problem, and noting the large amount of development that the system is under, we recommend that something needs to be done about that. And this is very important for the synthesis of our report, because it really says that there is a way forward. We believe there is a way forward to address the key problems in the lakes, but they require us to point our finger away from the entrance and towards the actual source of the problem, right? And that is a pretty fundamental shift. And it's really important for us, I think, to make sure that is explained well and people understand why we think that's so important, and enlighten what we learned about the process, if possible.
Thanks, Will. Which brings me to another set of issues which certainly became clear to us as panel through the process, and people have been asking some questions about that throughout as well, which is the development pressures. And a question to you and Nicole and anyone else from that would be how concerned do we think we should be about future development? How big an issue do we think that is? I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, Nicole, in the future, given that the state government is planning big growth? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really big pressure. I think that the results from the study showed that development pressures and increasing, those impervious areas and the pollutants generated from them can potentially have an impact, because it will result in, with current planning measures, increased pollutant loads to the lakes if planning controls aren't improved. And I think that's really what we're suggesting in our report, that there are ways that we can improve, perhaps incorporate more planning controls for development, and make sure that that development planning controls are actually implemented on the ground. Another thing that was mentioned is sometimes I think that those requirements in the development control plan can be contested by developers, and perhaps it's got more force to include it in what's the plan that sits above it? Help me out.
LEP?
LEP, thank you. Yeah, the local environment plan for, so that it can be enforced by council more easily and not be contested by developers. But I think, it's difficult, but I think it could be done, but it will be challenging.
One of the challenges I'm seeing reflected in the comments that are coming in tonight in response to your presentation is really about who's paying for this. We've talked about, as a panel, our recommendations, a couple of levies, and I know that residents are under some pressure in the Central Coast. So it is an issue, isn't it? So I wonder what message, and maybe Will and Nicole, given that people are obviously concerned and about the cost of all these, and given that we think the catchment's really important, and given that we've talked about levies, what's our message to people around that, do you think?
Well, there's a few broad comments and a few specific comments that we've put inside our recommendations. More broadly, we have, I think, very explicitly stated that council cannot bear the burden for everything that's fostered upon them. And there is going to need to be state responsibility in this. And it's very difficult for council to manage the extent of tasks that are put upon them without having ongoing funding for these things. So if we, in one hand, want to have clean water and we want to have a healthy ecosystem, we need to then manage it. Where is the water coming from, and how can we maintain that? So we know that council has done a fair bit of work on installing fairly innovative water-sensitive urban design, but it comes at a fairly large cost. So how do we manage that into the future. So we have said, yes, it has to be managed, or the share of the problem has to be managed by state government as well as by local government. And if the community does so desire to have something similar to what they see elsewhere, then we need to find an ongoing way to fund that. And that is the sort of things that we see in most other councils around the coastline. They have environmental levies, and you can see what they do at Lake Macquarie. You can see what they do at Mid-Coast. Those monies are well spent, and the community supports them. They become ongoing things. If this is what we want, then the community has to decide that that is what they're willing to pay for. If not, then we have to be, cognizant that that won't happen. Then the money does not come from nowhere. So I mean, we're trying to balance both those things. And what we recommend is that we need a joint vision. So we need the community to come on board and say, well, what is the vision and how are we going to get there? And it can't be based on gotcha politics. We can't try, as happened before, of having forums where one group's yelling at another group what they should do and everyone has the right answer. We've come into this very much. I mean, we're hosting this tonight with the idea that we can put out what we have and have a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Thanks, Will. And I don't know if any other panel members got anything to add to that. If not, that's fine. So there's a couple of comments coming up tonight about those homes, and you touched on it, Nicole. You covered this, but the actions and the activities in the homes, the nearshore residences, the things like sewer seepage, people putting stuff on their gardens, fertilizers or poisons or that sort of thing. I don't know to what extent we see this as an issue in terms of water quality. Do you want to add anything to what you've already said about that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an issue what happens on private sites, especially homes surrounding the lakes, because as mentioned, it's the urban stormwater is a real key issue in those areas. Things like fertilizers are a key pollutant of concern if they're not used appropriately, like they've got high concentrations of nutrients in there and they're available nutrients. So you see that, washed off into the surrounding lake and causing, issues such as eutrophication, which can then, lead to dissolved oxygen issues when they decompose and the ooze issues. So, whatever, every bit counts, and whatever individuals can do on their own sites to help manage the impacts of urban stormwater and water quality on the lakes, every bit counts. So it is important, and I think nutrients from fertilizers and, I guess lawn clippings and the like is important to manage, especially in those nearshore areas, but everywhere really, because you consider urban stormwater is generally connected to a waterway of some description. So even if it doesn't reach to the lake, it might just be your local waterway that it affects.
And I gather that things like sewer treatment, sewer control is better than it used to be. Is that right? I'm speaking from my ignorance here, but what's the story there?
I think historically, are you talking historically? So I think historically there used to be a lot of on-site sewage on-site households sewage plants before it was largely sewered. So that sort of removed some of the catchment pressures there from septic systems and the like, impacting on water quality in the lakes. So now most of the region is sewered. There are, I think, less pressures from that surrounding the lakes. However, we do have aging infrastructure for the sewerage systems and the like, and development pressures, which can result in more wet weather overflows. And I guess that's a concern, but that's sort of something that council needs to manage with added development. And they also have that compliance, the auditing system, I guess, that they go on site, where they know that there is on-site systems and make sure that they're complying with license requirements.
Okay, good. So I'm trying to keep an eye on questions that are
I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. I've been trying to find it. I can't find it anywhere. It's not showing me. So I'm not sure if I stopped sharing my screen, I'd be able to see it, but I have no view of it at all.
Give that a try. That's right. You don't need to. We'll
probably it's helpful to stop sharing your screen though in that weekend then.
Yeah, okay, I will.
There's a comment about regeneration of salt marsh and other habitats around the lake as part of improving runoff quality and water quality. To what extent, what did we see in around that stuff? Can you add anything there?
I'm happy to step in if you want, Nicole.
Yeah, sure.
I think a couple of things just to one is that the water quality in the lakes is scheduled that specifically as a discussion for the forum is the day after tomorrow. Is that right? I think that's Thursday night. But I'm happy to touch on it here. And I think, there's a couple of things happening. I can see a lot of the posts about RAC and RAC management. And yes, we've made some very specific and many comments about RAC management within the report. And one of the big findings for us, and it's not new, it's just something that we really think is important and needs to be brought out, is that we are getting a lot of our poor water quality into the system around the edges, particularly within the groundwater coming in from the local urban area. And there's many sources for that. It's mostly all human based. But as that comes in, it's seeping into the face, and that is causing what we're talking about. Who made the comment? John made the comment earlier about the algae on the foreshore. And that is a really, quite a big issue for the community, and something that needs to be addressed. When we say the quality of the water is not overly poor, that's largely not that area we're talking about. We're talking about the large area in the middle of the basin, which is seemingly disconnected in many ways from that around the foreshore. And this is what we wanted to go into some detail with on Thursday. But it's that, originally we had seagrasses all throughout the system. As the turbidity and the nutrients in the system kicked up, those seagrasses moved more to the edge, grew very strong on the edge, and it created this sort of what we call bimodal, two different heads of this lake system. One on the edges that is full of algae, high nutrients, and a real problem that we got to fix, and then another one in the middle that is not anywhere as near as unsightly and poor. So it's managing that, and there is no easy fix for that. The water on the edges is not going to mix with the inside with just a simple fix. We know that. And so that's where we've really been focused on, well, what can we do for that? And that's, I don't know how much we want to talk about here, Stuart, but certainly on Thursday, that's the focus of the discussion.
Yeah, sure. So yes, if you're interested, come back Thursday and Angus will be talking in some detail about that. What else has come up? Is anyone else seeing some big questions that are arising there? Because I've basically tapped into what we've picked up in the lead up around the catchment specifically. I wonder, while we're looking, there are some questions about, have we talked to council? And I guess the bigger question there is, where to for the report? What happens next? What's our role? Do we have a role? So you're probably the best person to speak to those sorts of questions.
So as I started off tonight saying that when we submitted our report, our expert panel was formally ceased to exist. And even tonight we're here as just a group of a collective individuals who are interested in getting feedback and expanding this conversation. So we do not exist as of now, and all that exists is the report itself. So I am advocating for these, I guess, the actions recommendations to be taken up. And there's a few key ways that can happen. One is by us advocating and trying to make things happen. Two is getting the support of others and having them advocate for change and saying that, what we've recommended is worth trying and going forward with. And then, the next stage beyond that is taking it to the individuals. And we see that one of the things that council is doing now, councils all up and down the state now are running, is a thing called the Coastal Management Program. And this means that council has to go through and set what are the priorities, and then how they will fund to look after those priorities over the next 10 years. And part of that is getting the big scope of what council and the community want to do and work together, and then bringing that through this process that is called the Coastal Management Program towards an outcome. And we're really hoping at every stage of that process that council and state government and federal government will consider the recommendations in our report, and we're advocating for them, but we can't force anything upon them.
Good, thanks.
I don't know if that answers the questions to it, but that's, I think, as much as we can really offer right now.
Yeah. There are, a bunch of questions that are probably pertinent to others who'll be interested on Thursday night about things around the water and the RAC. So probably best to respond to those when we've got that group of people in the room and we've got Angus who can speak directly to them, unless there's anything obvious there that Nicole or Will you want to jump onto.
Well, Dave has made the point time and time again that we need alternative strategies for managing particularly the edge of the lakes. I think, Dave, you would notice in our report, we were favorable for, doing these things and having community engagement. We just know that it's not going to work with just one person doing it, right? And we want to create a way to upscale that to the entire lake. And we need a way that the community can get engaged and get involved, and that that involvement will then turbocharge everyone to do the right thing. And that really has to be led between fisheries and council and others, and education, as you say. So I think we've very explicitly commented on that in our work. It's just trying to get it across the entirety of the lake, so everyone is engaged in doing the right thing, and everyone can effectively do it. We're all on the same page with that. So that's been something we've really tried to. I hope that comes across in the report.
Thanks, Will. So
there was a comment on the New South Wales government response. John, we're still waiting on a formal response. So we haven't had one yet. I'm aware that the process is ongoing. So what's happening, from what I've been told, and I'll tell you everything I know, is that council is, and I think people would have seen this, they're pulling together their first stage of their scoping report of their coastal management program. And in that, from what I understand, they will identify the actions that they may or may not take up, based on our recommendations. And that's completely up to them to do so. And then my understanding is once that has happened, then the state government will look at what remaining actions are there, and they'll decide what may or not be taken up. And beyond that, all I can do is advocate for change in the background and say, they asked us to do this. We've asked the community. We're hoping that the community feels that, we've done mostly the right thing here. And so let's roll this out across, but it really is up to them. That's one of the downsides of being an independent group, John, is that we are independent. So we can completely make our own minds up, but then we have no control of if they take it up or not.
Yeah. Yes. And I guess my part of the report was very much advocating for the role of all stakeholders, community, agencies, and everyone has to be in this together, because while ever we're standing apart, pointing at each other, we will get what we've got. So, I'm strongly suggesting that collectively, the community, council, state government, find ways to do some science together, to do some learning together, to work out how the lake works together. Lots of good theories out there. But what I've seen is there are many different theories, and it's about testing together and learning together, I think, is the future of the lake system. Got to learn how to do it together.
Look, and Stuart, may I just add, my final comment on that is that my biggest fear is that this will just be seen as another report. And we've tried to write it in a way that it wouldn't be that it would be a line in the sand upon which we would say some very strong feelings of strong science to support what we've done, and say this is the science we've read, we've brought together, and if everyone agrees that the science is supported by the community, something should happen. And my concern is that this report just gets put on a shelf, and then we've all just wasted our time, right? And so part of these sort of process, part of tonight, is trying to understand, well, is there not a lot of noise about it because everyone's happy with it, right? Because they think, oh, that's generally okay. Or is there not a lot of noise because there's COVID and a million other things happening? And, we want to do these things to try to get some feedback so we know where we're at with, some of the things that we've been talking about. And then if you disagree, can we have a conversation about it?
And to generate some energy to start for us all to advocate, because as Will says, the panel doesn't exist anymore, so we can't advocate as a panel. We can only advocate as individuals. I don't live there, so why would they listen to me? So yeah, that's right. There's a couple of questions coming up about the entrance. Now, tomorrow night is the session when we're really going into detail on that. So, I recommend, well, it's treated in some detail in the report, absolutely. David's done a good job on that, and we will be summarising that tomorrow.
Want to give an opportunity to say something tonight, Dave? If you're...
Is that what's the high level message, Dave, around the entrance? And make sure you're unmuted.
The high level message is don't train it. That's the main recommendation. Don't think that this is going to be a silver bullet that's going to fix it. It hasn't worked in other systems. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay, good. And if you want to dive deeper into that, join us tomorrow. Dave will be talking to the why that position, where it comes from and what's the research behind it, because I know that's obviously through the consultation process, that was the issue around which we got most input, which no one would be surprised about, that and RAC and ooze. So there's a question there from Tony about the amount of sediment. I don't know. Does the panel have any idea as to the amount of sediment that enters from the catchment? Nicole, you touched on sediments. I think you're saying erosion is a major source. Can we say anything more about that?
That's right. So essentially, erosion is a major source, can be up to double the catchment loads. Council has put in a lot of sort of bank stabilisation works and rehab works to try and address that in the catchment. We do have a model, conceptual model, to sort of estimate the sediment loads off of the catchment, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what that says. And I think that, we could also be collecting further data to better inform that model as well.
Thanks.
And I think, well, Angus can talk to that. There was a bunch of work done. What the exact number was. It was some very interesting stuff around how on large flows, a lot of it does short circuit and go straight to the ocean. And it was more of a concern on the moderate to smaller flows where we're getting most accumulation of sediment within the lake as it matures.
All right, I believe, help me here, panel members, that we've sort of covered most of the big things that are coming out, which are particularly related to catchment. As I say, there's a bunch of other questions. There have been some questions, Nicole, both tonight and previously, about heavy metals. And again, we're back to the ash dams and the power stations. And again, this might be an Angus water quality thing, but is anything coming into, what do we know? Do we know anything about heavy metals from those catchment sources?
Look, not specifically. Catchment metals can come from urban stormwater from various different sources. Well, I did see a note about metals being monitored in lakes, in the lake from the ash dam and stuff. I think Angus looked at those monitoring reports, but I think a quick look showed that some of the reports that he referenced that looked at ecological assessments of impacts from power stations were around 1992. I'm not sure if there's been anything more recent.
Okay. All right. So perhaps Angus has more to add to that.
One of the things is that if you have metals, we also call them cations, the heavy metals in the water column, when they hit salty water, they immediately flocculate out, right? They precipitate is the word. And that means they go from being soluble in the water to insoluble in the water, which means that they end up building up in the sediments. And that process over time means they don't travel very far, but you do get large loads in the sediment. And that typically has bigger issues for animals that eat the sediments or when we disturb the sediments. And that is the big concern is, how does that move through the food chain? What is the process that we need to be concerned about, and everything else, sort of associated with that.
All right.
There was a comment, Stuart, earlier, a couple ago that I just highlighted, was about education.
Yes.
The value of education, and look, we hope that we emphasize that appropriately enough in the report. We also believe education in the broader sense of the entire community taking up education within schools, education within the community, but an engagement within the community. One of the things that we really were hoping to come out as a recommendation is for something to be like, what is the water quality in the lake today? On the ABC in the morning, they talk about what the waves are and where the wind's blowing, what rain's going on, but can someone tell you, yes, the water quality in the lake today is 7 and the metals are low and the water quality pH is high and everyone's out, it looks great. We don't get enough of the good stories coming out that most days, from what we can see, the lake water quality is pretty good. And so we like to be able to educate both on the processes, but also on what's happening today. What did we learn? What are people doing around the river, around the lake banks that are really perceived by the community as being something valuable that we need to share? And what is going the best way of managing the education on rack removal or the entrance or the catchment? And how do we link that the catchment is influencing? These are things that we have been trying to encourage and I guess disseminate as much as possible.
All right, thanks, Will. So Michael's asking about sawdust. I remember references to sawdust from the power stations, and again, we might not be the right people to talk to that. I don't know.
Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, Angus and Katie were really they went very deep down these roads, and I wouldn't want to take that from them.
Sure. So again, that's Thursday night. We'll be looking really at what's going on in the water in the lake and on that foreshore, the rack, and etc.
I will say maybe those two that we were limited by information that was available. So we did not conduct any scientific studies ourselves, and that is a real thing. So some of these issues we highlighted as we just don't know because there is no information on it. And that is something that we then recommend that if we think it's important to go out and do that. There was a comment earlier about the second entrance, and you know, we gave our thoughts about the value of a second entrance, but we were very explicit saying that we don't see that there was any, and Dave can talk this better than anyone, but we didn't see any particular study that had simulated what had happened with the entrance. So we didn't have data, we didn't have numbers in front of us. So we recommend that some should be done. And that permeated through everything we did. If we didn't know and we thought it was important, we did recommend that should be done. But we just didn't want to recommend more studies to do more studies. Yeah, that's not what we're trying to achieve here.
If I can just butt in there for a second, Stuart, Sean Fawcett here. Sorry, my camera and my internet's really terrible tonight. But what was quite pleasing is that there, and I guess this goes back to everything that you started this evening with, Stuart, and that is that for the community, council, the other levels of government, state, federal governments together to move forward to protect the lakes, we need to do it with the basis of honesty and trust and sensible conversations. And I guess one of the good things that our panel has come across is that the lakes have been studied in more depth than most lakes or coastal lagoons anywhere in the world. And we have a lot of information in which to base our recommendations on. It's not like we're poking in the dark here. And we also have the value of hindsight, looking at what other things have happened in other lake systems or lagoon systems when people have said, for example, the water quality is terrible, let's train the entrance. And so we have real live studies that are going on every single day, Lake Macquarie, Illawarra, you name it, the Peel Harvey Estuary, where we can look back and say, well, actually, that was their response and look how dreadful that has turned out. But one of the things that I'm also quite impressed about is, and negatively impressed about, is the distrust between what has been done and the general community's consensus about what the problems are. And I have heard for years, generally the community saying that council are covering up stuff, council don't know what they're doing, and council have got no clue. Well, actually, it's been quite encouraging to see all the studies that have been done, and council have never gone in with the mindset of saying, hey, we do not want the entrance to be trained. Now find me all the answers to tell me that it doesn't need to be trained. So I think that should be encouraging for all of the community to know that the studies that have been done have asked a question and then they've gone out in search of the answer and they've come up with an answer. And I'm sure that if the community really were put in the seat of most of those council officers or even the councillors themselves or state government and said, okay, here's all the studies at hand, what's your silver bullet? And as Dave Wainwright said earlier, the entrance is not the silver bullet. And I can tell you that it's an easy fix, it's quick, it's easy, it's relatively cheap compared to actually what needs to go on, and that is a whole heap of catchment management. And so it's great for me as a panel member to sit down and know that the work that has been done to date is really solid and it's not covering up anything, and we can be confident about the recommendations in which we put forward, not just to the council, not just to the state government, but also to the community, because this is a community asset that needs to work together. All levels of government and the community work together to make sure that the lakes are protected and maintained for future generations.
Thanks, Jan. That's good. Yeah, thanks. I'm just seeing a comment here from John. How do we get community people to work together to address the issues? Do we need a sociologist? I guess that's my area of work, and it's actually it's not as hard as we might think. I think the fear of working together is greater than than the experience of working together. You know, once we get together with some good process and start listening to each other, then magic can happen. You know, I know it, I see it, it happens all the time. So I think we have to take a step towards each other with some good process. And, you know, council through its CMP is moving in that direction. There's time. This stuff doesn't have to happen overnight, but over time, I think we all will get better at having these conversations. And certainly that's what I am continuing to advocate for, is ways that we can learn with each other and from each other, and, you know, be smart together. We're fully capable of it, and I've got a lot of confidence that with the right process in place, that's where the community will get